Quay, Quay. Merry winter solstice. Merry winter solstice. So I started this video and then I stopped it and I'm starting it again. I decided I really just want to focus on how we know that we were not supposed to be part of the federal government as Indians. And, I did send my Indian not tax package to the Department of Finance as well as the Department of Environmental Protection. So as they sit with those documents and review them and research them, I feel it's probably good that I also look further, although I know the power of the documents I sent them, the papal bull being at the top of the list. It's still good to reinforce your argument. So we want to look at a document where two senators were debating about Indian civil rights. Now, when I first did this video just a few minutes ago, I was caught up in the argument of why are we talking about Indians when this whole thing is about emancipation of quote unquote slaves? Why in the 14th Amendment are we even talking about Indians not taxed? It's just one of those things, y'all, where we just have to go down that rabbit hole perhaps separately, or maybe it'll come up while we talk about this. But for now, I really just want to show you the exchange between two senators talking about Indians. Once again, why are we talking about Indians in the 14th Amendment sections? Because the Indians were, quote unquote, what became Black people. So let's share our screen. This debate took place in 1866. This article is from the American Indian Culture and Research Journal, uh, volume 28, issue 4, I guess. This is from 2004, and it begins on page 37. We're not going to read all those pages. I just want to go look at the exchange. And this will further let us know that being outside of the United States, they had no jurisdiction to tax us. They were not counting us for representation or representatives in Congress. They weren't supposed to issue us driver's licenses, social security cards. They, and even even if somehow we did, shall we say, cross wires with the federal government, they still didn't need to look at it as if that made us in their jurisdiction, put us in their jurisdiction. I mean, the way I see it is if you're on my landmass, you should want to accommodate me without compromising my standing. You're here, on my land. So I should be getting perks for that at the very least. I mean, you're on my land. And as much as you have the doctrine of discovery backing you, well, that has been repudiated, so they have that no more. But anyway, let's get into this. So the debate was about the 14th Amendment as it relates to tribal Indians. And they're talking about Section 1, where it speaks of subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and Section 2, excluding Indians not taxed. It's kind of convoluted to me, and I'll try to hold that thought because I really just want to look at the exchange between these two senators. So let's start reading, and I'll try not to stop. The phrase excluding Indians not taxed appears in both Article 1 and the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. This essay examines the phrases excluding Indians not taxed and subject to the jurisdiction of sections 1 and 2 of the 14th Amendment as they apply to Indians. Why we are talking about Indians while we're in the midst of emancipation amendments and slavery is beyond me. But here we go. This essay, through analysis of constitutional and legislative history, will demonstrate that tribal Indians were purposely excluded from citizenship. They should have been because they were in tribes. Anyway, the drafters of the 14th Amendment clearly defined tribal Indians as Indians not taxed. This is what the problem I'm having, because the writer here seems to want to make this only about tribal Indians, but my argument is it applied to all Indians. Even Indians who were not in tribes were not being counted by the state census. So for this writer to say that the drafters of the 14th Amendment clearly defined tribal Indians, that's not true. Okay. And actually, I did do this in the last video. I wanted to show, okay, so he says it's clearly defined, tribal Indians, but I wanted to look up the word tribal in the Constitution. And it is, as you see, there's no mention of tribal Indians, right? Nowhere. That's why we're getting a red. There's no count. There's no matches. Phrase not found. You see, tribal is not. This is the 1789 United States Constitution with the amendments. So tribal is not even in here. So there's no tribal Indians, right? But the writer of this article is saying that the word tribal, that the 14th Amendment clearly defined tribal Indians as Indians not taxed. No, it didn't. It didn't even use the word tribal. Again, we'll look really quick because we want to see. I put tribes in the first version because I want to show that it does mention tribes, but it's called Indian tribes. It's not called tribal Indians. And it's not in the 14th Amendment. There's only, if you look down here, there's only one word, tribes, in the entire Constitution. So and this is in Section 8, the Commerce Clause. Article 1, Section 8, and this is Clause 3. 1, 2, 3, see? And it's to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. It doesn't say tribal Indians, and there's no other version of this if we go down to the 14th Amendment. It's way down here. So here's the 14th Amendment, and here. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting in a census the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. So he's saying they're talking about tribal Indians because he feels that when they say subject to the jurisdiction, they're talking about tribes. But what he's failing to understand is individual Indians weren't subject to the jurisdiction of the United States either. That's why in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, they're not counted. So he's doing a little bit too much. He's trying to say that Indian tribes are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. But Indians not taxed are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States either. So what are you talking about? No Indians are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. But tribes get pulled in through commerce. The Indian tribes, we just saw tribes. See, to regulate so Congress, what they did was they saying because they're regulating commerce with Indian tribes, they have the power to have jurisdiction over them. You see, that's why those three foundational cases, the Cherokee Nation were in those three foundational cases because they were tribes. They were Indian tribes or known as Indian tribes. And so this government could pull them into court under commerce. What was the commerce in those three cases? Well, two of the cases, the commerce was that in Johnson versus McIntosh, the commerce was the Indians selling title to a to someone. I guess it was a citizen, a United States citizen that the Indian was selling title to. So, well, it didn't say citizen. I don't believe it said. It's the point is the Indian was trying to sell title, and the government said, no, you don't have the power to do that. So the government is saying that was commerce. An Indian trying to sell title is commerce. And so that's how the government pulled rank over them because they're saying, oh, you're acting in commerce. So we can pull you into court, you see? But anyway, I just want to show that Indians not taxed were not tribal Indians. They were just Indians that were in the state. And that's why the state had to make a point of not counting them because they weren't in a tribe. Okay. The census takers, I'm under the impression that they did not count Indians in on reservations because they were a separate government at one point. But all of it is semi. It's like the United States is doing things with Indian tribes that they would not normally do with a nation that is actually a foreign nation. So the United States is basically creating something new with the Indian tribes in America. They're making them as what they call domestic dependent and semi-sovereign. I've seen that words, you know. So anyway, back to our article. I just wanted to show that the the 14th Amendment does not clearly define tribal Indians. It's just saying Indians not taxed. It didn't say tribal Indians. So that was my problem here. Okay, so the drafters of the 14th Amendment clearly defined tribal Indians as Indians not taxed. No, it didn't. As not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. I agree that no Indians are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, but the United States created new terms so that they can pull Indians under jurisdiction, particularly the Indian tribes. Okay, this essay delineates the jurisdictional links between taxation and citizenship. See, you can only be taxed if you're a citizen, right? And discusses how the courts have repeatedly misconstrued the pertinent phrases. Solid arguments will verify that acts which impose citizenship on all Indians, contrary to the 14th Amendment prohibition against tribal Indian citizenship, it was not just against tribal Indian citizenship. Indians not taxed and also not in tribes were also, uh, you know, not to be citizens. Okay. So solid arguments verify that acts which impose citizenship on all Indians, contrary to the 14th Amendment prohibition against tribal Indian citizenship, are unconstitutional. Finally, this essay substantiates that Indians not taxed was defined to mean that tribal Indians are not taxable. I still say no Indians are taxable as long as they remain subject to the jurisdiction of their tribe in any degree and hold tribal elite degree. No, no, I'm really having a problem with this, but I'm going to try to let it go. The only place these phrases are defined in a constitutional setting is in the 1866 debates. Now we have a problem already because if they're defined in 1866 and the Constitution was written in 1787, this government has a big problem with defining things after the fact. And I'm here to tell you that's why we have a lot of the chaos that we have in this country, because you should have defined it before you wrote it. So what you're doing is leaving everything open for reinterpretation when it comes to a document like the Constitution. That should be a crime. So he's saying the only place these phrases are defined in a constitutional setting is in the 1866 debates. You should have had these debates prior to 1787 when you wrote the Constitution, though. Okay, so let's read. The only place these phrases are defined in a constitutional setting is in the 1866 debates related to the 14th Amendment, as recorded in the Congressional Globe. Extensive quotations in context are necessary to assure authentic representation of the drafter's intent. Well, they're not talking about the drafters of the Constitution. They're talking about the drafters of these debates, I guess, or the drafters. I'm sorry, of the Civil Rights Act or the 14th Amendment. Okay. Well, the 14th Amendment did come in 1868, but you shouldn't be defining Indians not taxed because that was written in 1787. But it is true that the 14th Amendment did take effect in 1868. So they were debating the 14th Amendment, but Indians not taxed again was already written in the first article of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, Clause. So the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This is the congressional debate. Now, I want listeners to really hear because this is also strengthening my paperwork. And when I say my paperwork, I want to be clear. I drafted my paperwork, although I did use some documentation as evidence, like the papal bull and the United States Constitution, as well as my public legal notice. But I wrote my paperwork and I referenced these three documents. Okay. But now I may see the good news is that if they come back, now I have this document to show them. I'm going to win, y'all. I'm just going to say it that way. The only thing they could possibly do is try to, misconstrue something. And I'm going to be able to shoot that down. But This document right here that we're reading, this lets me know that I'm going to get what I requested, and that was to be not taxed. And so let's read, because I want my listeners to also feel confident should they decide to be Indians not taxed as the Constitution provides for them to be. So listen to this carefully, y'all. These are the two senators debating about this 14th Amendment, which is so odd because, again, this had to do with basically Black folks, but they're talking about Indians. I mean, we are the Indians, but that's that's the game, y'all. That's the game they're playing. So, Congress first granted full citizenship to former slaves with the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was, I guess, maybe it was probably ratified in 1868, but this is when they were speaking about, giving the quote unquote slaves civil rights. Now, what I think we in the Indian community, I think what we're agreeing on is that these were our own family members who were working on our farm, right? They weren't slaves, they were the children that were of a young age, but this was in Indian country, so the federal government should not have had uh, jurisdiction to tell us what to do. But I think what was happening, I really think Indians were struggling because they were not getting paid, you know, properly for their produce. That's what I think is at the bottom line of this. They were nickel and diming Indians, and Indians still could not make a living. That's what I think was the real problem. And they needed all the work they could get from their family to produce enough to make enough money. So it's almost like you were forced to use even child labor because they weren't paying you. See, I think this is what's not being said. Indies was not making enough money, y'all. They were working hard on these farms and they just were not making enough to get by. And this government knew this. They weren't paying you properly. Okay. This is what the problem was. And this is what made Indians not want to be in this type of deal. They figured we might as well become citizens because they're not paying us enough as Indians. This is what it's looking like to me. If anyone has comments about it, please feel free to comment. Okay, so uh, let's read it again. Congress first granted full citizenship to former slaves with the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The act also excluded but why are we talking about tribal Indians? If this is all about slaves, why are you talking about tribal Indians? They are so deception is scary, y'all. To see these big, self-important Congress people just lying, presenting a picture to create a narrative, right? Why are you talking about Indians? Something dealing with slaves, you know? So they let's read it, y'all. I can't, but let's go. We want to get to the debate between these two senators, but I keep getting pissed off. Okay. Congress first granted full citizenship to former slaves with the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The act also excluded tribal Indians from citizenship. So the writer here, Greg Beck, is a businessman on federal trust land of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in Cherokee, North Carolina. He is married to Freela Owl Beck. So that's about the writer. Okay. Back to what we were reading. During the debate, excluding Indians not taxed was defined to mean tribal Indians. Okay, we saw that word is not even in the Constitution. But anyway, uh, during the debate, excluding Indians not taxed was defined to mean tribal Indians, foreigners those who are not part of our people, and people excluded from United States citizenship and enumeration. So there, boom, we now know that we can, be certain that they're talking about the census. We weren't supposed to be counted in the census. That's how they're going to get a count. So let's read it one more time and I'll keep going. During the debate, excluding Indians not taxed was defined to mean tribal Indians, foreigners, those who are not part of our people, and people excluded from United States citizenship and enumeration, thus all of whom were not taxable according to the ideology of 1866. So in even in an Emancipation Amendment, they're saying that Indians are not supposed to be taxed. Okay? This is why I wrote to the Department of Finance and the Department of Environmental Protection. They're doing their research, and I really want to help them. I feel like I should send this to them. Yeah, really, just this part, where this debate takes place, okay? The act was passed by Congress and vetoed by President Andrew Johnson. Congress overrode the veto. General understanding concluded that the 1787 Constitution excludes slaves, Indians, and other non-whites from citizenship. Most legislators believe that a constitutional amendment would be necessary to grant citizenship to former slaves. Within a few weeks, the same Congress constitutionalized the act through the 14th Amendment. Because the act and the 14th Amendment are inextricably bound together. The intent expressed in the act mirrors the intent of the 14th Amendment. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 was first debated in the Senate on January 30th, 1866. Within moments of the bill's consideration, Senator Van Winkle addressed the bill's constitutionality. Following Senator Van Winkle's remarks, the Senate immediately began to debate a debate that lasted 3 days on the status of Indians under the Act. Mr. Trumbull, I move to insert the words, all persons born in the United States and not subject to a foreign power are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States without distinction of color and they cut it off. Mr. Guthrie, I will ask the senator if he intended by this amendment to naturalize all the Indians of the United States. Hmm. Mr. Howard, that is the very question I was about to put. Mr. Trumbull, our dealings with the Indians are with them as foreigners, as separate nations. We deal with them by treaty and not by law. I should have no objection to changing it so as to exclude the Indians. It is not intended to include them. That's us, y'all. But I really want us to hear what he's saying here about this is Mr. Trumbull saying it. Our dealings with Indians are with them as foreigners, as separate nations. We deal with them by treaty and not by law. I should have no objection to changing it so as to exclude the Indians. It is not intended to include them. Okay? So right there, just keep that in mind. This is our standing as Indians. Although we're the Indians that were reclassified, black, Negro, colored, we are still Indians. They broke us up into Indians and slaves. So they're really talking about the same people, but to get us into their system, they have to refer to us as slaves because Indians, were supposed to have their own. But what they did was, again, they turned us black, and then they uh, rolled in the Native Americans and gave them our position and turned us all black, and then keep referring to these Native Americans as Indians. These comments set the tone of the Senate debate over the following 3 days of deliberations on Indian citizens. Again, you gathered here today because you're emancipating Negroes, but then you're going to spend all this time talking about Indian. Why? Did the Indians ask you to have this conversation? Why are you talking about Indians that are not in your jurisdiction? Why? It's because you're making them slaves, and then you know that you have them in your jurisdiction as slaves. When you call them slaves, it's like they're your property. So this is why they gotta sort of talk about us at the same time, because they're gonna act like we're preserving one, but meanwhile you're taking control over the other, but they're both the same. You just name them two different things. That's what they're doing. These comments set the tone of the Senate debate over the following 3 days of deliberations on Indian citizenship, Indian taxation, and the constitutionality of the act. These drafters were unclear as to how Indians should be treated by the United States and individual states. But why, when there's no Indians involved here? Like, we got to ask ourselves, why is Congress wasting their breath talking about Indians when the whole idea was we're dealing with slaves in the South? So there should be no question about Indians because y'all are all gathered here today to talk about freeing the slaves. Why are you so concerned about Indians? The reason why, here's again, the reason why they can even talk about slaves is because they're assuming property ownership of slaves. But Indians are a different thing. They should not be talking about Indians here, y'all, because as far as we know, Indians are not involved in this conversation. You have time is money. You're getting paid to be in these seats, as far as we know. You're there for a specific reason. So why are you 3 days? You're talking about Indians. You're wasting time, and they shouldn't be spoken about because you don't own Indians, especially if they're in tribes and if they're separate nations, like you keep saying. Why are you worried about if they can vote? They have a whole separate system. You see, Indians, how we uncover the fraud here, the shenanigans here. They want us to look at them as if they're so concerned. But in a legal sense of the word, you should only be concerned with those slaves that you are dealing with. For you to add something else to this conversation, there's something wrong here because you're not showing us evidence that Indians wanted to be citizens. You're speaking for the Indians as if they're your slaves while saying that they're a separate nation because you're talking about the Indians that you are making slaves. Okay? Those would be the Negroes. That's why you're talking about Indians here, y'all. The drafters were unclear as to how Indians should be treated by the United States. It just doesn't make sense, y'all, because Indians, the Native Americans were on tribes. We remember we talked about this before. Native Americans were already on tribes. It was only the Negroes that were the Negro, quote unquote, Indians, or quote unquote Negro Indians that were not on necessarily on because we were everywhere, right? That's why you had the colored only signs because Indians were not on tribes or reservations, I should say. But Native Americans were put on reservations and there they stayed. They were never being limited like quote unquote Negro Indians were being limited, right? That's why there was a civil rights movement in the first place, because they had Indians who were not in tribes necessarily all over the place. They would, the whole state was our reservation, you could say. So they were just trying to figure out how to, minimize our presence somehow. Because Native Americans may have had reservations, but Negro Indians had the whole state. That's why they were a problem. You know, the whole state was their reservation, quote unquote. Really, it was just their ancestral land. So they were having a debate on how Indians should be treated. Why are you doing that when you're trying to free Negroes? Why are you worried about how freeing Negroes is going to affect Indians? It's not going to affect Indians. It's not going to affect it. You shouldn't be trying to pull two different people in under the same legislation unless they're one and the same. And you got to make it look, you got to keep talking as if you're honoring Indies because what you're doing is dishonoring them. But you got to make it look good. So here's another excerpt. Let's see. As seen, okay. The drafters were unclear as to how Indians should be treated by the United States and individual states, as is seen in this excerpt. Mr. Lane, I desire to call to the attention of the chairman that most of the Indians in our state have taken an allotment of land. And our Supreme Court has decided that by the act of accepting allotment, that they have separated themselves from their tribal relations. See, they were trying to break us up. And I suppose the chairman does not intend to make the Indians of Kansas citizens of the United States. Mr. Trumbull. They are already citizens of the United States if they are separated from their tribes and incorporated. Oh, that's a different. He doesn't mean incorporated, like I thought, in the community. But 501(c)(3)s are automatically under the jurisdiction of the federal government, like any corporation is, subject to regulations, like Indian tribes are, federal Indian tribes. And I think here Mr. Trumbull is wrong because, again, we had Indians not taxed who were not in tribes, y'all. It didn't say they were in tribes, right? We don't hear about tribes again until Section 8, Clause 3, when Indian tribes are in commerce, but not Indians not taxed. This man is saying, so wait a minute. How are they already citizens? What process made them citizens? So it's a grab. That sounds like a grab to me. I think what's making them citizens is when they okay, let's break it down this way. If they're already citizens, why aren't they being counted for representation in Congress, Mr. Trumbull? This is what I'm talking about, people. If they're already citizens by not being in tribes, why are they not taxed? Because citizens get taxed. So I think he's wrong here. They are already citizens of the United States if they are separated from their tribes and incorporated in the community. No, I don't agree with that. But the government is trying to, that's what the government wants, is to make them citizens. As much as they're talking about not wanting them to be citizens, the government wants them because there's more of them. And if they tax them, that's more money for the federal and the state. Mr. Lane, but they are not. Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Lane. They are not. We do not intend to extend to them the right of citizenship, but our Supreme Court, Kansas, has decided that their lands are taxable. Ooh. And that they are separated from their tribe. So once you take an allotment, your land is taxable. You see how they keep trying to get us to pay taxes? And that's what the Dawes Roll did. The Dawes Act, I should say. It gave you an allotment instead of and broke up your tribe. But this was done in 1887. And again, the 14th Amendment was 1868. The Dawes Act was in 1887. So that's like 20 years later, or almost, well, a little over 10 years later, I guess. Mr. Lane is saying he's disagreeing with the guy that they're already citizens. Okay? Because the Supreme Court decided that their lands are taxable and that they are separated from their tribe. Uh, Senator Kawan and others challenged the constitutionality of the act, Senator Trumbull continued to assert the propriety of the act based on the powers granted to Congress to establish uniform rules of naturalization under the Naturalization Clause. On the 31st of January, 1866, the debate resumed on the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The controversy related to the naturalization laws and citizenship continued. Senator Davis of Kentucky spoke at length. This excerpt summarizes his opinion. The whole material out of which citizens were made previous to the adoption of the present Constitution was from the European nationalities, from the Caucasian race, if I may use the term. Let's read that again. The whole material out of which citizens were made previous to the adoption of the present Constitution was from the European nationalities, from the Caucasian race, if I may use the term. I deny that a single citizen was ever made by one of the states out of a Negro race. I deny that a single citizen was ever made by one of the states of the Mongolian race. I controvert that a single citizen was ever made by one of the states out of the Chinese race, out of the Hindus, or out of any race of people but the Caucasian race of Europe. Hmm. So he's saying only Caucasians were citizens. He said, previous to the adoption of the present Constitution. Okay. I come then to this position that none of the inferior races of any kind were intended to to be embraced or were embraced by this work. Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence was, excuse me, only the Caucasian race, he's saying. Of the government in manufacturing citizens. See, something that the government manufactures, I wouldn't want to be anyway, because that's going to be your new lord and master. All their intentions and all their powers upon this subject were simply to make foreigners of the European families of nations citizens of the United States. All their intentions and all their powers upon this subject were simply to make foreigners of the European families of nations citizens of the United States. Hmm. Senator Lane offered an amendment meant to allow Kansas to tax Indian allottees, that all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, and Indians holding lands in severalty by allotment are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. Wow. So, it's like you don't even get a choice. They're just making you a citizen. Why, why would they want to make somebody a citizen though? You know, why don't, okay, so rewind. All of this is like they're supposed to be upgrading slaves. In other words, they want to look good by the idea that we're taking this pitiful person from slavery into our lovely citizenship. In that conversation, they refer to every other race for some reason. And you just wonder, why are y'all even making this so broad a conversation? Just let it apply to Negroes and y'all won't have to worry. But somehow they got to talk about Indians. Okay. Senator Trumbull objected to the amendment, professing that he had no objection to the amendment considered earlier, which excludes from naturalization all Indians who do owe allegiance to any tribal authority. Senator Pomeroy wanted to revise the Lane Amendment to include the words tribal authority, to which Senator Trumbull did not object. This debate illustrates the Senate's difficulty finding suitable wording to accomplish the common objective of excluding tribal Indians from U.S. citizenship. It's almost like they are worried about making Indian citizens more than the Indians are. Like they are making all this hoopla, but they don't seem to have any Indians there. So that's also odd. So I think what it is they really want to make Indians citizens because that's how you get them off their land. And that's how you tax them. So they're acting like, oh, we don't want to do this. But you're the only ones talking about it. The Indians are not even there. Um, Senator Trumbull ultimately suggested phrase excluding Indians not taxed from Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, which did become the wording in the act and within weeks was incorporated into Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. So Senator Trumbull got what he wanted. Okay. Of course, we cannot declare the wild Indians who do not recognize the government of the United States at all, who are not subject to our laws, with whom we make treaties, who have their own regulations, you see, Indians, whom we do not pretend to interfere with or punish for the commission of crimes one upon the other to be the subjects of the United States in the sense of being citizens. They must be accepted. So he's saying there's a distinction between wild Indians, okay? So let's read it again. Of course, we cannot declare the wild Indians who do not recognize the laws of the government and the United States at all. See, I'm trying to get Indians to see that that's what we were. So when you're talking about voting for Trump, it's not falling right on my ears, but yet Indians are really depending on the foreign entity to have their best interests. And I don't understand where they're getting that from when all this time, anyone who's ever been in that presidential seat, we've never been respected as Indians, Republican or Democrat. They're pushing the narrative that we're black. And then we are making some kind of leaps to think that Trump actually recognizes us as Indians, but he doesn't either. It's just him having intel enough to know that perhaps he could say a few, you know, random words, and we will construe that to mean that he's speaking to Indians. No, he's not. No one in this government is addressing us as Indians. So that's why I don't understand why Indians feel like they even have a voice. You know, they'll take your vote, but they're not going to treat you like actual Indians. You're going to be federal Indians under federal anti-Indian law. So, of course, we cannot declare the wild Indians, those Algonquins, except for the Lenni Lenape, who are civilized. I think the Pequot are too. I think the Pequot are civilized tribe. I'm not sure. But I just know that any tribe trying to get federal anything, it's the point. The whole point of having a birthright is missed with Indians who are constantly seeking federal anything. We're not supposed to be being taxed. They're supposed to leave us alone. Wouldn't be getting stopped and frisked if we were Indians. I'll say that again. If we were Indians, we couldn't get stopped and frisked because we're not under federal jurisdiction. But your Lord and Savior Trump, he's implementing stop and frisk. So I guess he does not recognize you as Indians. He sees you as niggas. Yes, say it and free your mind, free your soul and say it. He sees you as niggas because he's treating you like niggas with his stop and frisk. When you get stopped and frisked, you treated like a whole nigga. Now, I mean with the a whole nigga. Yep. I have to say it, because I gotta try to wake up Indians. They end up still, one eye woke. Uh, if you were not in their system like you're supposed to be, as like we're reading right now, with two senators speaking on what Indians were, they wouldn't have the jurisdiction to stop and frisk you. When you're in their system, they're going to find time within the course of their presidencies to implement stop and frisk. And who's going to be the victim of that? All you Indian niggas. Because y'all still want to be niggas when you're supposed to be Indians. I'm sorry, I have to say the word because that's what y'all are being. And that's how they're going to treat you. Like niggas. Sorry. Again, if you were not in their jurisdiction like you're supposed to be, they wouldn't have the authority to stop and frisk you. They couldn't because you wouldn't be subject to their laws, like we just read. Wild Indians who do not recognize the government of the United States at all. Well, why should we? This is our country. We had our own system before you arrived. Why should we recognize? All you recognize in us is an opportunity to steal. So why should we recognize you other than a thief? No, you don't get no recognition from us when you treat us like you do. But again, we are not subject to their laws. They wouldn't be able to stop and frisk us. Okay. So with whom we make treaties, they're supposed to make treaties with us. At this point, I don't know if we can even make treaties with them, yo, because the treaties they made with us were bogus. Those treaties were bogus. That's why they could just throw them away because it was conquest. It wasn't. camaraderie, it was conquest. People who have looked at the treaty say they weren't properly signed. You didn't know who signed. So they're really there are contracts that are void, the treaties. They just did those to make it look like they were treating us fairly, but no, they weren't really. So we have our own regulations whom we do not pretend to interfere with or punish for the commission of crimes once upon once upon the other to be the subjects of the United States in the sense of being citizens. They must be accept, not accepted, exception, made like an exception. The Constitution in Section 2 of Article 1 excluded them from the enumeration of the population. See, this means we weren't supposed to be counted in their census, y'all. So what I'm saying, all Heru is saying is we have to be moving back to this. Not, we've already been in their states, right? We see that we're still getting treated worse than third class citizens uh, because there's no owner on the land, y'all. With us being in their system, there's no owner of the land, and they get to, you know, be the owners and, they get to stand in our place like proxy or something. If Indians get out of this system, there'll be owners of the land again. There'll be someone to answer to. There'll be someone to collect rent. There'll be someone to get a cut of all the profit that these corporations are making instead of the federal government, because it's really Indians who should be getting paid for commerce that's taking place on their land. They should get a cut, a good one too. But if you're in their system, then you're not going to have that position. You're not going to have that authority. You're just going to be under their dominion. But you see, the Constitution excluded us from the enumeration of the population. We were not counted in the census. When it says that Indians not taxed are to be excluded, this is what I'm telling the Department of Environmental Protection. And now I have backup. See how good the answers are? When you have a little doubt, they say, well, read this. So now I'm going to have this to back up, depending on how they, come back at me. But they know I'm not paying, right? They didn't say, well, keep paying in the meantime, because they know I already said, nah, that's a done deal, y'all. Just do your research, okay? Call me back when you do your research and let's get this thing done, okay? I got other taxes to void. Nah, don't waste my time now. So Indians, yeah, the ancestors saw how bad I wanted this and they gave it to me. But they like that because they know that I'm going for my birthright. I don't think they're going to like Indians who want to stay in the system. I don't think they're going to, I don't think they uphold that. If you if you ask for what is rightfully yours, the ancestors can't help but guide you. That's what they're there for. So say I was sort of, as time goes by, you start to wonder, well, what are they going to do? What are they going to say? And the ancestors say, don't worry, we got something for you to read. You got this, boy. And this showed up. And it's saying everything I already knew, but now I have it by two senators who were talking about the 14th Amendment. And I told them that I'm not a citizen. So I'm going back to Indians not taxed. That's my standing. It's not a status because I'm not in a state. It's my lawful standing on the land. It has occurred to me that perhaps an amendment would meet the views of all gentlemen, which use these constitutional words and says that all persons born in the United States, excluding Indians not taxed and not subject to any foreign power, shall be deemed citizens of the United States. Now, see, this would have been much more clear, but of course, they didn't go with this. That would remember, I was saying they could have wrote it in a way that it was more, you could grab it quicker. It has occurred to me that perhaps an amendment would meet the views of all gentlemen, which use these constitutional words and says that all persons born in the United States, excluding Indians, not see, listen to that, Indian. That he's saying it should have been like read like that. And not subject to any foreign power shall be deemed citizens of the United States. Now, Indian tribe would be considered a foreign power. But so that's why I don't agree with this because whether you're in a tribe or not, you're still an Indian not taxed is really what the Constitution is saying. It didn't say Indian tribes not taxed. It just said Indians not taxed. Okay. The ensuing discussion reveals the degree to which race defined citizenship. Senator Pomeroy, all that we ask is that those who are taxed should be citizens. Right. Mr. Trumbull, my own opinion, and here's where Mr. Trumbull goes off, y'all. I like how Mr. Trumbull was saying what he had to say. My own opinion is that all persons born in the United States and under its authority, owing allegiance to the United States, are citizens without any act of Congress. The Indians have separate governments. Okay, let me have to highlight that. The Indians have separate governments of their own. They do not recognize, nor are they made subject to the laws of the United States. They make and administer their own laws. When you're voting for Trump, y'all, you are not making and administrating your own laws. You're giving that power to Trump, and he is not recognizing you as an Indian, y'all. Because if he did, you would be not taxed. If he did, you would not be expected to take a census. So I don't know what Indians are doing, but I just know that they're operating in opposition to what they were. And I still don't quite know why. Because really, this government was supposed to honor that Constitution. What that means? It means that they can't come at you in any kind of hostile way because you have a footing here. You have a footing here. We were supposed to be in some kind of commercial agreement. So why would they be hostile with someone they're doing commerce with? Why? But I think Indians expect this government to be hostile. Well, they will if you don't know your rights. Of course they will. They want to genocide us, but we have to let them know who we are. And the fact that they want to genocide us, really, it should be a means for us to just really nicely ask them to leave because they really don't have any any right to be here after the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. Because the whole point of doctrine of discovery was to subjugate us. If we're not being subjugated, that means we're going to be looking to get our land back. That's in direct conflict with everything that this federal foreign government has been trying to do for the last 200 years. So Mr. Trumbull, he's got a clarity that I find refreshing. He says the Indians have separate governments. Do we have that now, Indians? No. Were we supposed to? Yes. Are there any Indians talking like that? No. If you create a state, is that having your own? No. If you resurrect whatever tribe you were, isn't that yours? It would be. So then what are you trying to do? Is it because you think you're going to get more than what you had as the Indian you were? Are you trying to infringe on other Indians' territories? Is that what it is? Because that just means you are probably worse than colonizer because you're trying to rob from your brother instead of respect his property and not steal from him and work it out with him. If you could work it out with colonizer, you should be able to work it out with your own people. See, that's what I'm seeing, that Indians want to try to work some deal with this wretched government. All when they do that though, that tells me you don't have any intention on really making good with other Indians because you'd rather have a third party here as if he's some kind of referee. So that means we're still fighting because you are not trying to uh you know make some kind of amends with Indians that you have had issue with. The truth is, we were all speaking Algonquin. Those of us who broke off were only influenced by the Moors. Okay, so let's get some more refreshing words from Mr. Trumbull. Let's read it again, in fact. The Indians have separate governments of their own. That would be revolutionary. They do not recognize, nor are they made subject to the laws of the United. Didn't I say that? I think when Indians hear that, they feel like this man is trying to get anarchy. No, I'm not. I'm trying to avoid genocide. That's what I'm trying to do. And you know, that's why I say if Indians are not going to do it, then I have to, make some kind of law. I mean, it's basic law, when it's, basically golden rule stuff. So, but that's what I would have to do because if I'm not under the subjection of the United States, then I have to have my own laws, right? Yeah. Because the laws of the United States don't apply to me. So I'm free. I'm a free man of the land. They make and administer their own laws. They are not counted in our population. They are not represented in our government. That we're not represented in Congress. Haven't I been saying that? Is it? I guess you have to see somebody else say like a senator, then it makes all the sense, right? Okay, fine. Here we have him. Mr. Trumbull is telling us, Mr. Trumbull, you might be going with my next mailing to the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Finance, depending on how they step back to me. Because I'm so empowered by this, y'all. It couldn't have come at a better time. Only because, as human beings, we have our moments. And it's like I'm just getting more and more confirmation from the ancestors. Thank you, ancestors. Thank you, Grandma. Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you so much. So Indians are not counted in the federal government's population or the state. We are not represented in their government. And the Constitution of the United States, in determining who shall be represented, says, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Okay, so he's saying that's what it says, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. See? We're not, everything we already said, this man is confirming. So Indians who still doubted when Heru said it, here's your receipts. This is a senator having a debate with other senators. It would be great if our senators would even dare to have this conversation now, right? They would never. They'd start talking about Native Americans and shit. Um, does the senator from Indiana want the wild roaming Indians not taxed, not subject to authority to be made citizens of the United States? Persons that are not to be counted in our government? If he does not, let him not object to this amendment that brings in even the Indian when he shall have cast off his wild habits. Yeah, wanting to own your own land is wild, isn't it? And submitted to the laws of organized society and become a citizen. They really think citizens. The thing is, you're in somebody else's homeland. How are you so comfortable in organized society? If you didn't organize it in your homeland, there's no way you can organize it here legitimately. So, Mr. Trumbull, I might disagree with the last part, but the first part, this is what we're here for. This is what we're here for. We got to let Indians see how we were seen by the Constitution before they started misinterpreting the Constitution. And wild Indians, all that means is you were not those civilized ones who now you don't own anything because the government is going to dish it out to you. See, this is what they're not saying. When you become civilized, that's where you end your land ownership. Indians not taxed have a right to land ownership, especially since the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. So is Mr. Trumbull going to say any more? Because he's about the only one that I'm interested in hearing. Mr. Doolittle is saying, let me just see. Oh, we got some more Mr. Trumbull. Oh, shit. Is it a long one? Okay. So let's see, because we're not going to go too far into this document. Page 6. Should we go a little further? But y'all get the idea, right? I could just link this article. I don't know if you want to read it. Oh, should we try to? Um, Mr. Hendricks said, I have no desire that the savage Indian shall be declared a citizen of the United States. I'm with you too, bro. I have no desire that any Indian should be declared a citizen of the United States. I do not think he is now, and I do not think he ought to make we ought to make him such. The clause of the Constitution to which the Senator Trumbull referred has nothing to do with the question of citizenship. Therefore, he cannot use it to rely on. It is a question of taxation. He's correct, though. Mr. Hendricks is correct. He's correct. It is a question of taxation and representation, what the basis shall be. My objection is to his proposition of making property a test of citizenship. Hmm. Hmm. My objection is his proposition of making property a test of citizenship. Let's just move on. But you see how they're talking about us Indians. So maybe we'll understand we were not supposed to be part of this government. And that's not a radical thing. It's a survival thing, survival of your own culture instead of melding into a European Negropean one. I should say Negropean only. My position, this is Mr. Davis. My position is that this is a white man's government. I agree with you on that one, yo. It was made so at the beginning. Facts. That's what the Moors said. They said the Moors said that they made a two-system government, one for Europeans and one for themselves. And both of them are foreigners, the Moor and the European. But the Moor is here rolling out the red carpet, okay, for some another foreigner. You see, what? See, the Moor married into some matriarchy, or I think they became a matriarchy after the Moor married them. And he said, "It's all about you, girl. It's all about you, girl." Meanwhile, he's genociding the whole society of Indians around her because it's all about you, girl. And he like, tell me more. Tell me more, Muhammad. Tell me more. Uh, or whatever they named it. El Baba Ray LB. Tell me more. Tell me more. Um, yeah, say my name again. More. I'm sorry, y'all. But that's what it looked like happened. He came into her life and said, it's all about you. But really, it was all about him because he all he talk about is being a Moor and how she's a Moor now. And forget it, Junior is definitely going to be a Moor. And so Indians are slowly getting their own heritage bred out because the Moor is so staunch in his. And his is just make everybody a Moor if you need to, and then take their land because that's why we make you a Moor so we could take your land afterwards. After you say I am a Moor, we come with the moving truck and take your shit, put a little red hat on you, and now you's a Moor with no land. Okay, except through commercial laws, not by birthright. You will have to have land through some kind of form of commerce, buying it, renting it. It ain't yours no more because that money has to go to our sultan, something like that, right? Uh, my position is that this is a white man's government. It was made so at the beginning by the Moors. The charters that were granted by different sovereigns of England. Yeah, how do sovereigns of England see sovereigns can do that, y'all? I was trying to look for something that could to show you that as a sovereign you can make charters. As a citizen, no, no, you can't. As a sovereign, you're considered owner of the land. As a citizen, you're just occupying it or you're a resident on it, a serf on it or something. So Indians are scared of the word sovereign because they're scared to be a real boss. See, they the kind of Indians now are the boss, uh, but they are under a boss, and that boss said, "You the boss now, but come to me when you make your move. I'll show you how." In commerce, and so Indians they'd rather have a boss than be a real boss, you know. That's what it seems like because I don't hear Indians talking about anything, that is in the ballpark of this stuff. You know, it's like distraction, a lot of distraction. But this is the meat and bone of our issue. It's our standing on the land. You can't make any move unless you have a proper standing. If you're a citizen or anything like a citizen, you have no authority over this beast we call a government. I don't know how many times they have to diss us before we know that we're being dissed. And even foreigners do better. It's like they get more. It's like there's more moves made to secure immigrants than there's any moves to sustain Americans. And Indians think that the government is going to favor you over even Europeans, you know. And Indians that want to be in the system, I think they're going to get it worse because the system, it knows that you have a better standing and that you're settling for being uh, a subject, and so if you're giving them that power, they're gonna take it. But it's not gonna suit you. You're gonna be begging, oh, please don't do this, government. They just do what the hell they want, yo. And because they're gonna say, well, you want me here, right? I'm gonna do me. Y'all know I'm a rapist and a murderer, but this is what you want. You think I'm gonna be nice to you because you said you an Indian, but you're not standing in the footing of an Indian? I ain't gonna be nice to you, baby. You know how I do. Eat the cake, anime. Eat the cake. I mean, when you accept the abuse, is when you get the abuse. You got to say, I don't want to be abused. How do I not be abused no more? You got to take your standing as the authority on the land. There is no authority now because ain't nobody an Indian but you. So if you're not here, the house is going to be run amok. You're going to be hoping and praying they don't do some legislation that's going to make your taxes higher and all, when you ain't even supposed to be paying taxes. My God, what kind of trouble of the world do Indians have to see? Because God know I don't want to see no more trouble. But I think Indians, it's like they really have to come for you literally for you to know that you're being came for. You gotta wait till the gun is in your face. And that's what y'all waiting for? Nah, nah. Mm-mm, mm-mm, nah, mm-mm. Okay, so these senators know what time it is, though, man. Back in 1866, they knew what time it was. They said, oh, we don't want to make them citizens. They got their own thing. We got our own thing. We got it. Uh, so he said it's for the white man. Yeah, I agree. But not if there's a new immigrant. Then the white man gotta take us several seats too. But they still gonna get paid more in this system. They're gonna make more money than Indians ever will. But they're just a higher level in the caste system. Everybody's a slave in this system. It's just levels of slavery, unless Indians decide, to get out of the system that they were never supposed to be in. When I say get out, you have a legal standing to do so. So the charters that were granted by different sovereigns of England to the various colonies were granted to white men and included nobody but white men. They did not include Indians. They did not include Negroes. It was it is a white population and not a Negro population or an Indian or a mixed population. That is the truth of history. No, that is a truth of history, a truth of history. It is a truth of principle. Mr. Davis is a little bit racist, huh? Senator Johnson goes into a lengthy disclosure on the Dred Scott case, quoting the court. This is Mr. Johnson. It is true that every person in every class and description of persons who were at the time of the adoption of the Constitution recognized as citizens in the several states became citizens of the new political body, but none other. Okay. It was formed by them and for them and their posterity, but no one else. Okay, so that's a little bit lighter form of racism. But you know what? I do agree with them though. Now I'm surprised that they're not mentioning Negropeans, but I think the Negropeans was acting like they was us even back then. Hmm. Maybe the Caucasians came after the Negropeans. I don't know. So the Negropeans could say we the people of this land. We the real ones here. We was here already. But who knows? Because they sound like there was no black people amongst them at all. Um, on February 1st, 1866, a third day of debate relative to tribal Indian status commenced. The debate focused on the phrase excluding Indians not taxed, offered by Senator Trumbull again. Within this debate, the not taxed component of the Indians not taxed was clearly established. Mr. Henderson, the senator will understand me as objecting to the amendment as it now stands. An individual of the Caucasian race, whether he pays tax in a state or not, is undoubtedly regarded as a citizen of the United States. Why make it obligatory upon the Indian owing no allegiance to any tribal authority to pay a tax before he can be regarded as a citizen of the United States? So she's saying, why make him pay taxes if they're not a citizen? My point is that the Indian, if he is connected with no tribe, whether he is taxed or not, ought to be a citizen. Hmm. So his point is that the Indian, if he is connected with no tribe, whether he is taxed or not, ought to be a citizen. Well, I don't agree with Mr. Henderson. No. Mr. Doolittle, from time immemorial, indeed, in the Constitution itself, this very distinction between Indian tax and Indian not tax has been a fundamental distinction in the enumeration of the people of the United States who are made the basis of representation and taxation. Indians not taxed were expressly excluded. I agree with you. Mr. Henderson. Oh, here's Mr. Henderson again. So were Negroes excluded? I'm sorry. That's not a question. So were Negroes excluded? Mr. Doodle, two-fifths were excluded and three-fifths were counted. Uh-oh. So once they started calling Indians Negroes, they counted them 3/5. Mr. Henderson, I am talking about citizens. I'm sorry. I'm talking about citizenship. Slaves were not citizens at all. Now they are. Mr. Doolittle, Indians not taxed were excluded because they were not regarded as a portion of the population of the United States. They are subject to the tribes to which they belong. And those tribes are always spoken of in the Constitution if they were independent nations to some extent, existing in our midst, but not constituting a part of our population and with whom we make treaties. Excuse me. Excuse me. There is another reason why the Indian not tax ought not be included in this grant of citizenship. If you make them citizens, of course, they will not only have the privilege of citizenship, but they will be subjected to the duties of citizenship. They will not only have the right to sue, but they will be liable to be sued. Mr. Ramsey, the senator from Missouri seems to base his position upon the mistaken theory that all Indians who are no longer connected with their tribes or under tribal government are civilized Indians living as farmers or in some other way earning a livelihood in the white settlement. That is an entire mistake. I think I like what Mr. Ramsey is saying. It certainly is not the intention of the senator or the intention of the Senate to admit Indians of this class to citizenship. I kind of want to read his again. The senator from Missouri seems to base his position upon the mistaken theory that all Indians who are no longer connected with their tribes or under a tribal government are civilized Indians, living as farmers or in some way earning a livelihood in the white settlement. That is an entire mistake. It certainly is not the intention of the senator or the intention of the Senate to admit Indians of this class to citizenship. Mr. Trumbull, the senator from Missouri, assumes that here is a sort of property qualification to citizenship. Such is not the meaning of the provision. We cannot make citizens of a foreign minister who is temporarily here. There is a difficulty in framing the amendment so as to make citizens of all people born in the United States and who owe allegiance to it. What does the phrase excluding Indians not taxed mean? It is a constitutional term used by the men who made the Constitution itself to designate what? To designate a class of persons who were not a part of our population. That is what it means. They are not regarded as part of our people. The term Indians not taxed means Indians not counted in our enumeration of the people of the United States. Mr. Trumbull is cooking with grease today, y'all. I gotta highlight him again. Because I think even our Indians today don't understand this. It's really a simple concept. Um, the concept is based on what were you before you were colonized? You were your own people. You didn't need the federal government. Why do you need them now? What are they giving you besides hell? and the appearance of order when it's really chaos. Mr. Johnson, considered virtually as foreigners. Yep. Mr. Trumbull, considered virtually as foreigners as a description of person connected with those tribes with whom we make treaties. That is what the phrase means. Mr. Henderson, not taxed by whom? By federal authority or by state authority? I like that too. So that's who we're not taxed by, y'all. Federal or state. Okay, Mr. Trumbull, by anybody. The term here is meant to embrace those persons who yet belong to the Indian tribes. Hmm. I don't know why they keep talking about tribes because Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 doesn't say anything about tribes. Um, Indians not taxed is a term used to designate those Indians belonging to a foreign government and not counted as part of our people. Yep. I just don't think they have to belong to an Indian tribe. But I agree with what he's saying. Mr. Lane, the proposition, excuse me, as it now stands before the Senate, does not reach the objectives that I intended. Um, it would be better to strike out that provision in reference to Indian not tax. The Indians holding their land in severalty by allotment are not taxed. Okay. Oh, that's what they're talking about when they're saying, why are they making it about land? But I think the idea is if the government feels like if it gives you an allotment, then you owe them because they are the ones creating your footing. They are giving you land in allotment. You know, they take a lot of liberties with ownership. The government does. Mr. Williams, I am simply describing the condition of these Indians. I understand the honorable senator to be in favor of making a distinction between one class of Indians and another class of Indians in the United States. Thousands of these Indians in the state that I have the honor to represent are collected upon reservations. Hmm. They are not subject to tribal authority. Their tribes are broken up and destroyed. Hmm. They consist of the fragments and remnants of tribes gathered together upon these reservations, but they are no more competent or qualified to vote than they were when they existed as original tribes. I insist, Mr. President, that if the proposed amendment is to be adopted by the Senate, it is in the best form in which it can be put at this time, and that the distinction which is made in it is the most convenient and certain one that can be adopted. The object is not to make taxation a criterion or a test of citizenship, but it is not absolutely certain and may operate with hardship, perhaps in individual cases. It is the most certain way of defining the distinction between wild, savage, and untamed Indians and those who associate with white people and own property. Okay. Oh, so there's more debates. I don't know if I want to go through the whole thing. Oh wow, this the whole. No, it seems to stop down here. It's pretty lengthy. This is a 30 something pages. What I might do, boy, it's really good though. Mr. Trumbull, I find that he's very clear. I just think that he thinks that they have to belong to tribes, but I don't think this is saying that Indians have to be in tribes to be Indians, not taxed. Uh, okay. Senator Trumbull's amendment was voted on and passed. So they went with Senator Trumbull. Thus, the words excluding Indians not taxed became part of the Civil Rights Act. Within weeks, this phrase became the wording in Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. The House debate on Civil Rights Act of 1866 relative to Indian citizenship was brief, but similar to that in the Senate. The constitutional powers of naturalization and definition of natural born citizens comprised most of the House debate. On the 27th of March, 1866, President Andrew Johnson presented his veto message to the Senate. The Senate voted to override the veto. The House concurred with the Senate and overrode the veto. The cloud hanging over the act's constitutionality remained to be resolved by the 14th Amendment, which happened within weeks. Both sections 1 and 2 of the 14th Amendment contain wording pertinent to tribal Indians. These sections state all persons born and naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. See, it's how they make a distinction between the United States and the state wherein they reside. The United States is a corporation, y'all. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction of equal protection of the law. Section 2, representation shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. Senator Howard sponsored the 14th Amendment Joint Resolution number 127 in the Senate on the 30th of May, 1866. According to the Supreme Court in Afroyim versus Rusk, Mr. Howard sponsored the 14th Amendment in the Senate on the 30th of May, 1866. The court said, Mr. Howard, the First Amendment is to Section 1, declaring that all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the states where they reside. I do not propose to say anything on that subject, except that the question of citizenship has been fully discussed in this body in January through March during the drafting of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. As not to need further elucidation in my opinion, this amendment which I offered is simply declaratory of what I regarded as the law of the land already, that every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States. This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of person. It settles the great question of citizenship and removes all doubt as to what persons are and are not citizens of the United States. This had long been a great desideratum, desideratum in the jurisprudence and legislation of the country. Senator Doolittle immediately proposed an amendment to add the phrase Indians not taxed to both the first and second sections of the 14th Amendment. Mr. Doolittle, I presume the Honorable Senator from Michigan, Mr. Howard, does not intend by this amendment to include the Indians. I move, therefore, to amend the amendment. I presume he will have no objection to it by inserting after the word thereof the words excluding Indians not taxed. Mr. Howard, I hope that amendment to the amendment will not be adopted. Indians born within the limits of the United States and who maintain their tribal relations are not, in the sense of this amendment, born subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. They are regarded and always have been in our legislation and jurisprudence as being quasi-foreign nations. So Mr. Howard is saying that Indians born in the United States are necessarily to be citizens. Mr. Kawan, I am really desirous to have a legal definition of citizenship of the United States. He then asked why Chinese immigrants and gypsies born in the United States were to be made citizens. The mere fact that a man is born in the country has not heretofore entitled him to the right to exercise political power. Mr. Doolittle, I move this amendment because it seems very clear to me that there is a large mass of the Indian population who are clearly subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, who ought not be who ought not to be included as citizens of the United States. Are these persons to be regarded as citizens of the United States and by a constitutional amendment declared to be such because they are born within the United States and subject to our jurisdiction? Mr. President, the word citizen, if applied to them, would bring in all the Digger Indians of California. Perhaps they have mostly disappeared. The people, perhaps, have put them out of the way. Our fathers certainly did not act in this way. For in the Constitution, as they adopted it, they excluded the Indians who are not taxed, did not enumerate them, indeed, as a part of the population upon which they based representation and taxation. Much less did they make them citizens of the United States. Senator Fessenden asked Senator Trumbull's opinion because he believed that when the Civil Rights Act was debated, tribal Indians were excluded from citizenship. Mr. Trumbull, the provision is that all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. That means subject to the complete jurisdiction thereof, not owing allegiance to anybody else. Can you sue a Navajo Indian in court? Are they in any sense subject to the complete jurisdiction of the United States? By no means. See, you can't even sue us in court when we're not under their jurisdiction. We make treaties with them, and therefore they are not subject to our jurisdiction. If you introduce the words not taxed, that is a very indefinite expression. What does excluding Indians not taxed mean? You will have just as much difficulty in regard to those Indians that you say are in Colorado, where there are more Indians than there are whites. Suppose they have property there and are taxed. Then are they citizens? And Mr. Wade, and ought to be. Mr. Trumbull, the senator from Ohio, says they ought to be. If they are within the jurisdiction of Colorado and subject to the laws of Colorado, they ought to be citizens. And that is all that is proposed. It cannot be said of any Indian who owes allegiance, partial allegiance, if you please, to some other government that he is subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. It seems to me, sir, that to introduce the words suggested by the senator of Wisconsin would not make the proposition any clearer than it is. And it is by no means, and it by no means embraces or by any fair construction, by any construction, I may say, could embrace the wild Indians of the plains or any with whom we have treaty relations. For the very fact that we have treaty relations with them shows that they are not subject to our jurisdiction. We cannot make treaties with ourselves. It would be absurd. I think the proposition is clear and safe as it is. Senator Trumbull asserts that the first and second sections must be considered together with respect to Indian tribes or tribal Indians. Section 1 deals with citizenship. Section 2 deals with representation. Tribal Indians were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and were the Indians not taxed. I still don't agree with that, though. I think all Indians, whether they were in a tribe or not, were supposed to be Indians not taxed. It's just that Indian tribes got pulled into the jurisdiction through commerce, the Commerce Clause. Okay. They were not to be enumerated for the purpose of representation or subject to U.S. laws, including taxation. The debate continues as subject to the jurisdiction is defined in terms of allegiance. Mr. Trumbull, they, tribal Indians, are not subject to our jurisdiction in the sense of owing allegiance solely to the United States. Mr. Van Winkle. The Supreme Court decided that these untaxed Indians were subjects and distinguished between subjects and citizens. Oh boy, subjects. Mr. Trumbull, I do not think they are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States in any legitimate sense. Certainly not in the sense that the language is used here. I think that the phrase Indians not taxed, the very words which the senator from Wisconsin wishes to insert here would exclude anybody, I'm sorry, exclude everybody that did not pay a tax. That was the meaning of it. We must take it literally. I am sure the senator of Wisconsin would not be for that. So, this goes on, but I feel like I have to take a breather and let it go. Wait, so we did almost get to the end of it. I wonder if I should just finish it. There's no more than Mr. Trumbull, and he's the one that makes the most sense to me. Uh, okay. I did not ask him the question whether the government has the military power to go into Indian territory and subjugate the Indian. I asked whether under Constitution we bend our laws over the Indians and compel obedience. I asked whether the Constitution. Okay. When the Civil Rights Bill was under consideration, I was of the opinion that the term not taxed means not taxed. And when those words are in the law, I take them in their natural sense. When there is no ambiguity, I'm sorry, when there is no ambiguity, the law says there shall be no construction. And when you say a man is not taxed, I presume it means he. I do not know any words that express the meaning more clearly than the words themselves. And therefore, I cannot express the meaning in any more apt words than the words used by the senator from Wisconsin. Indy is not taxed. Mr. Clark, suppose the state of Kansas, for instance, should tax her Indians for 5 years. They would be citizens. Mr. Howard, undoubtedly. Mr. Clark, but if she refuses to tax them for the next 10 years, how would they be then? Would they be citizens or not? Mr. Howard, I am not yet prepared to pass a sweeping act of naturalization by which all the Indian savages, wild or tame, belonging to a tribal relation are to become my fellow citizens and go to the polls um, and vote with me and hold hands and deal in every other way that a citizen of the United States has the right to do. So he's not prepared for savages coming in and do what citizens do. Mr. Doolittle, the president, the senator from Michigan, Mr. Howard, declares his purpose to be not, I'm sorry, to be not to include these Indians within this constitutional amendment. In purpose, I agree with him. I do not intend to include them. My purpose is to exclude them. So I think we got through all of the. I yeah, I'll just have to. We got through all the quotes. I think. I hope because I'm getting tired, and it looks like we did. So maybe what I'll do is just link to this. But I just wanted to show in 1866, they knew that we were a separate entity from this government. That's what we're supposed to go to, Indians, in order to be Indians, not taxed. Um, the system has to work around us. In other words, it can't uh, look at us as Indians, not taxed, and then proceed to try to disenfranchise us because the next thing we would have to have is land. And whoever is on our ancient territories, they should be paying us. And so that's what I see. If Indians see different, well, feel free to comment. But I just need to show this for my own sanity, and I think I will end up using some of this in any future paperwork just to show, because today's lawyers and legal system, they're just so not aware of the fact that number one, we were the Indians that were misclassified. We're the only Indians that were misclassified, meaning we're the only Indians. And number two, we really were supposed to have our own land. This is something this system doesn't seem to understand. But I want to say thank you for watching. I'm going to try to link this article. I did have other things to look at, but it's gotten late now, and I think that would have to be in another video. Once again, Merry Solstice. Merry Solstice. Thank you, thank you. Till next time, be and stay highly favored.